our week's work on the sixth, that is the law of attraction, the third power, the sowing, the reaping. This is a very ancient law that was known amongst the primitive civilizations and was worshipped by them by their various superstitious cults. They were always cautious to placate the gods, to turn away evil, and not to set in motion any particular fetish or custom which could cause any recrimination or suffering on the tribe or clan or any part of their social community. So strong were these that if anyone disobeyed these special protective laws, the consequences were pretty grim. These special protective laws, the consequences were pretty grim. Protection that these ancient tribes, through their long history, had drawn up to more or less make a veil between the unknown and the mysterious and that which couldn't be understood, should have to be looked on with respect, and every part of their religions were built on the law of attraction and repulsion. We know this as the law of cause and effect, which is a scientific concept in which one set of magnetic waves will attract and another opposite polarity will repel. You have this simple mechanism in an ordinary magnet where you put positive and negative poles. They will attract, put them together in similarities, they repel. So apart from this being a deep superstitious culture, it also has a scientific background in the law of magnetism and electricity, which we know as the affinity of polarity. But when we move out of the religious area and scientific areas, and we move perhaps into the psychological field, we begin to see here that there is a great field of human behavior. Field, we begin to see here that there is a great field of human behavior. They wouldn't start a project without either consulting the seers or the stars or sufficient omens in which would bless or would warn them against their particular ordeal. We sail blatantly by and think of all these things as just stuff and non-ordeal. We sail blatantly by and think of all these things as just stuff and non-damage upon the environment that we live in, and also the atmosphere by which human beings communicate. Although we have many references to sowing and reaping, no one until the esoteric schools came into a more forward existent teaching the ancient wisdom did we realize that these fundamental laws were the very structures of the universe, that they are a very part of the maintenance, life support system upon which all life is able to sustain its existence. And we defy these basic laws at our peril. It doesn't mean we have to return to our superstitious primitive origins, or perhaps it would be better if we did, but at least we can begin to study them from a spiritual psyche. Better if we did, but at least we can begin to study them from a spiritual into the economy of the spirit can be reapplied. I'm quite sure that we waste 2/3 of our earth life because we don't use it rightly. I think we waste almost a half of it in unnecessary suffering that nobody wants. And I'm perfectly certain that most of our conflicts are wasted energy, and that some result of these conflicts is not only a waste of the abundance and the human patience, but in human suffering. We may be stupid and have prides and many other particular virtues we call human, but when we apply these to the universe we live in, we are actually, as the ancients would say, attracting the attention of the gods. And this, of course, is happening, as the ancients would say, attracting the attention of the gods. And this, of course, is happening, eliminated, and the violence by which we attack our universe are all waves which have a re-emergence. And so if we attack nature, then nature must attack us. If we put violence into space, then space must return violence to us. I know this sounds almost like the eye and the tooth and so on, but there is a certain basic law which requires that if we do unto others this thing will be done back to us tenfold. So we can release in our thinking and spiritual life certain aspects of thought, pictures, formations, designs, which instead of being a blessing unto our fellow human being can be a retrogressive act. I think the Christians have been more liable to this than any other particular sect, in that they have used militant salvation, militant type of trying to enforce or impinge their particular militant type of trying to enforce or impinge their particular, needn't be proud of the Inquisitions nor the Crusaders or any other particular type of setting in effect the law of attraction. I'm perfectly certain that the whole Mediterranean area now would be basic Christian if it hadn't been for the Crusaders. They sound very romantic at this stage, but the amount of villages they laid waste, the amount of women and children and captives and things they did under the name of their religion repelled and set in motion a great antichrist wave because of the violence, the law of attraction and the law of repulsion. In other words, we set in a cause and effect. As this happens within the history of nations, it comes as we set in a cause and effect. As this happens within the history of nations, perhaps the history of the Mediterranean would have been entirely different if it hadn't been for the violence of which the early Christians were accepted and to which those who followed it tried to inflict. So as we study history as well as psychology, we can see then that this law of attraction, this setting in motion the third power. To understand this, if we create a force that is within mind or nature, we either attract or repel or set in motion a cycle of events. So if we hate a particular thing, sooner or later that thing will come back to us, increased in violence. This is a thing the whole world must learn, that it's ideas which will bring peace to the world, not guns. All the while we try to use violence or aggression to subject people to one idea or another, then that must reoccur again later in history. When one understands the law of cause and effect, one begins to have a very deep. When one understands the law of cause and effect, one begins to have a very deep. Had their little altars and monuments, and they placated the gods of the harvest, and had their little altars and monuments, and they placated the gods of the harvest and the fitness, that these were actually gods, they were forces. They were energies which, if they got out of hand, could entirely devastate their existence. So we're coming now to world thought, to the ideas of making a world family, unless we have groups of people who can say, look, the only way we can solve this problem, family, unless we have groups of people who can say, look, the only way we can solve this problem. This third energy is quite easily understood because we have it in the ordinary sciences of fuel. If you put fire and water together, your third energy is steam. And with that third energy, you are able to do some useful work, or you can blow yourself up. Depends how you handle the third force. And so it is with magnetism and electricity. You set it in motion, you produce a field, the field contracts and interacts, and you either get a thunderstorm, sheet lightning, or you drive a power station. And you either get a thunderstorm, sheet lightning, or you drive a power station. And energy and consciousness is the same thing. So therefore, when we use thought, we are using consciousness, which in turn sets in motion energy formations, either within our environment, within our character, within our nature, or even within the economy of our own personal life. So the idea of forgiving your enemy is not such a bad idea. And also, I think instead of trying to go into conflict, we can use the ideas by which we set in motion a long-term feeling. Now, animals, strange enough, are very attracted to this idea of cause and effect. If you are in a bad temper, or if you have fear within you, every animal will fear you and will even attack you. If you have a great compassion and a feeling within your consciousness, the animal or the bird won't be afraid of you, but will trust you. And just the same with children. If you are still a child at heart and you have that consciousness of understanding, children will respond and require very little discipline from a person who has the deep compassion and understanding within them. But the militant can come into a class, and in no time at all you've got a first-class revolution on your hands and complete non-compliance. What is the difference between each individual? They have both come into the same atmosphere, and yet each gets an entirely different reaction, a totally different strata of response. So that the cause and effect can happen from the moment you walk into the room. It can happen the moment you pick up a telephone or write a letter or any communication at all. We set in motion the waves of our personality. And these activate within the environment, within the thermal instances of it, and create heat or cold, violence, anger, temper, love, or reaction. Now, once we begin to see that we are existing in a great whirlpool of energy power, which we can disturb by our very living, then it means that our thought life must come under a new sort of discipline. Where before we could hate and love and pick up and drop and do as children playing, as we become more spiritually adult, it means that a lot of our past behavior, or enjoyments, if you like, such as gossiping and judging people and condemning people in their absences and doing all the multitude of things that society thinks it's entitled to do to its fellow human creatures, must stop. Where before we could be treated as children, but now we cease to be children. Where before we could be treated as children, but now we cease to. And this applies very much to health. In the study of character and disease, we can see a person with a certain type of character will invite to themselves a certain type of disease, because they will set in motion. The causative factor of their emotional character will in turn affect the balance of their emotional status. These things you can say almost without exception that this will lead to heart failure, or this will lead to thrombosis. This type of character will suffer from this and that if this thing isn't disciplined. In other words, we are setting in motion the law of cause and the effect we can reap in health, in happiness, in communication, and in any field you like. This doesn't mean that we must become permanent doormats to anybody and everything, but it does mean that instead of trying to solve our problems by violence or resentment or hate or retaliation. We hold our horses along and walk round the thing and say we can solve this with ideas. And it is the ideas which are the solution. It's the whole solution to the world economy. Ideas are the tools in which we can make a new society, and ideas are the things which we can set in motion entirely new concepts of world government and the understanding. The alternative to this is massed armies, vast expenditure in annihilation weapons, where whole continents can be threatened by another. In fact, we have produced the society of fear. And the law of cause and effect goes forward again and again, and one fear produces another fear and another fear, until at last we get to this state where every nation's got practically missiles pointing at the other one. So somewhere along this line we must be able to come to some sort of mental arrangement. The first primitive action of anything which we don't like is to retaliate. And this, I think, is a spiritual discipline we must all learn. Retaliation is a form of mental arrogance, where we try to impose violence because we've been outraged mentally, physically, or religiously. We have this in political systems. The only answer is death. We try to solve the problem by killing when we only increase the problem by killing. This is a fundamental law. As we sow, we reap. As we set in motion, so will it manifest. And this, in the law of cause and effect, becomes not only a spiritual discipline, but this becomes a worldwide need to put away our weapons and use our ideas and set in motion a new type of society. So any of us that can, in some small way, within our occupation or our professions, in our communications with people and situations, if we can bring this wisdom factor to bear instead of the aggressive action to bear, then what is against us can be for us. What is our enemy can become our friend. What is a problem can become an advantage. And what is something disturbing can become an adventure. We can convert the whole aspect of this situation by applying the law of cause and effect in the right sense, in that instead of going into hostility, we go into observation and patience, and to let the wisdom, the ancient wisdom and the modern wisdom, come together and work out this problem. It must work out in the whole of the Middle East, it must work out in Vietnam, it must work out in Ireland, and wherever you have world violence. They are trying to operate the law of cause and effect. And the more they go into the hostility of rejection, then the greater forces of destruction are they let loose. So now if we think of ourselves as the third power, the power between, we can be not the people of peace, but we can be people who won't panic, people who can feel the situation and don't go into hostilities, don't become an enemy, don't take sides. Don't get involved, so to speak, in the conflict of which other people's type of resentments and hates and prejudices and biases are all boiling up and making a small incident into a big incident. Blessed are the peacemakers, they shall surely see the God. But it isn't just, I think it's a wrong synonym now, oil on troubled waters, but I think we can use this as a new sort of yeast, which we can set into the motion of communication and help people to see that the solution is not in repressive measurements, it is in the releasing of ideas and using the scientific law of cause and effect, that you set in motion the right sense of cause, then the effect will come along. The third power will solve the problem. This third power is there whether we release it or not. And this, I think, happens in self-forgiveness in many other ways. We could see this third power moving into the situation and completely changing it. But if we let the third power become an out-of-focus force, where we keep it within the inner consciousness, then you'll find problems do resolve themselves. That the thing which seemed totally incapable suddenly changes its pattern. And where before we were bewildered by the thing, we held the sense of wisdom, and slowly the energy changed, the picture altered, and the whole problem has dissolved because we hadn't antagonized. The energy changed, the picture altered, and the whole problem has dissolved because we hadn't antagonized. So now let us have a meditation on this, and perhaps we can then discuss this in a more open way amongst ourselves. The deep feeling of existence. Of existence. Within a hostile environment, and to tame it and use it is all a part of the early history of the human race. As the power of the individual increases, as the power of retaliation, as the power of the human personality in development, education, and science, this is moved out from the primitive development, education, and science. This is moved out from the of a great civilization. Spiritual teachers through the centuries have warned us that if we live for the sword, we die by it. If we subject ourselves to the laws of envy and pride and malice, then we must become victims to these things. We set in motion our own problems and conditions, and we can either activate and increase the world's troubles and confusions, or by detachment and understanding can help to solve them. As this applies to the physical existence, more so does it apply to the spiritual economy. For conflict wastes. Hostility uses energy that could be used. Hostility uses energy that could be used to destroy the basic faith and trust of human beings. And superstitions, which are at the basic root and the fear of each one's individuality, is constantly aware. Now let us, as esoteric students, move out into the field by which we can harness the event and use the experience and set in motion new ideas and align ourselves to the causes of universal consciousness and to the great need of the human race, and not add our pathetic personality battles to the environment or the conflict, the distress of others. As we serve the law, so does the law serve us. And as we administer the law, so does the law judge us. So let us now become an advocate of peace, and to use this wonderful structure of a star-planet system that holds the very things into place, which is the picture of man's history, past, present, and future, and use this in a wise, trustful, and meaningful way. The third power has been called the will of God. If we inflict and over-inflict our own retaliatory ideas, conflicts, hostilities, the will of God cannot work. It becomes our will. So in the law of movement, attraction, reaping and sowing, positive and negative, the cycle of the seasons, the movement of time, the migration of birds, the movement of fish, the communion of saints, the attraction of people, all these are the twains of the laws which work within the framework of human lives. Let us see this then as a new area for construction and for living. Then as a new area for construction and for living. Communication and in living within ourselves. And this in turn will set in motion those waves of higher attraction, the greater forces, the benefits to mankind, and so become a saviour of our race within our own consciousness, that we can look back upon with pleasure of a life well spent and turbulence left behind, and the peace of understanding become the heartbeat of our own conscious life.